So today I thought we'd go through the mainly libertarian argument that capitalism is actually a cure for poverty, and that in order to raise the standards of living for those in the third world, the only realistic way to do that is kind of sit back and wait for the free market to create jobs to supply demands in the first world. Now, I usually see this type of argument being pushed by right-wing college professors, you know, the types that skeptics might work up to. And by looking up to, I do of course mean while sucking their dick, but these professors like to act like they're walking into the depths of liberal hell and dropping mind-blowing truth bombs, acting as beacons of rationality and reason among a sea of feels over reals.
If I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia.
You sit here in Europe, in your cushy middle-class chairs.
So, and can you even clean up your own room? No.
Now, while they talk about a lot of things, economic or otherwise, in relation to our topic today, their argument is usually along the same lines as this. Now listen here, you goddamn liberals. A lot of rational people don't go to university, not because they don't have the grades or they're not smart enough, but because it's only politically correct liberals like you who scare them away, allowing your leftism to fester unchallenged. Me, on the other hand, I'm irrational and a professor, which makes me quite literally the smartest person in the world. From the perspective of your middle class lifestyles, working 12 mind-numbing hours a day just for the bare minimum for your food and rent may seem a little unfair, a little exploitative, but I'm here to tell you that this is actually the best possible situation that could ever happen to these people. You see, capitalism is saving them from their pitiful lives and making them useful to the market. There's a demand for smartphones in the first world, but because they're so expensive, to make them at a reasonable price, you need to have someone who's willing to work at an insultingly low wage and insultingly long hours. But if you were to come along and force these companies to make reasonable wages and shorten their working hours, they'd have to have mass unemployment, forcing these people back to their agriculture, where a lot of them would likely starve. So really, when you're saying you want higher wages, you really want these people to die. And you know what these people do when they don't like their jobs? They kill themselves. Yeah, that's right, these people have the balls to stand up and change their situation, so that instead of sitting around all day and complaining about labour rights. So what I'm saying is that capitalism is a system that requires a period of horrific suffering that drives many workers to the point of suicide, so that they may, in a few generations, have slightly improved living standards. It's just basic economics. Now, the problems here are threefold. One, it assumes that this necessary line of development is a real-world and material necessity, rather than one just born out of the system being used right now. Two, it doesn't even stop to think about what's going to happen to these places after they actually do industrialise and can't be exploited for cheap labour like they are now. And three, this guy is barely passable for any kind of right-wing academic with that hair. Now, this trick has been long practiced by conservative and libertarian types. When they're not trying to pin today's problems of capitalism on the state, or in some cases even the globalists, they're looking at very real, very horrific scenes of poverty clearly caused by capitalism, and trying to turn the whole situation on its head to actually make capitalism out to be the good guy in the situation, the saviour, and disgustingly make the exploited workers feel like they should actually be grateful for their exploitation. Topped off with some snarky remarks about how you don't understand basic economics, or you don't really care about poor people when you're just trying to virtue signal. Of course though, now this is a brilliant example of something I love to bring up whenever I can: pure ideology. Now, these people are so deep set in their liberal democratic ideology, so unaware of any possible alternatives, that they've convinced themselves that this quote-unquote solution, which even they know is just ethically disgusting, is the only way to go about doing things. Because to them, we're not even dealing with the methods of the system here. They just think this is just the way that life is, the way it inevitably goes. But of course, us enlightened euphoric Marxists know that there are other options. The fact that capitalism seems to have lifted as many people out of poverty as Stalin's killed,
literally 1 billion people have been pulled out of poverty,
is not something Marxists concede, but actually take as a necessity into their core argument. Capitalism is meant to lay the foundations for socialism via industrialization. So what you're saying is that socialism just piggybacks on the success of capitalism like a leech, almost comparable to its hippie followers on the welfare state. Which means that capitalism piggybacked off of feudalism then. Fucking idiot. Capitalism naturally emerged out of feudalism, just like socialism will out of capitalism. Everyone agrees that capitalism is great at industrializing things, and we can see that happening right now today in China. So yes, capitalism in a sense cures poverty. However, what's being missed out here because of that good old pure ideology is the fact that it's capitalism itself that is presenting this very dilemma to begin with. The problem simply can't be solved on the level of the workers at this production line or the company's own wages. Instead, what we need to be asking is, why is it that in the first place people are faced with the option between farming that's usually coupled with horrible poverty and starvation, or inhumane working hours? It's because people are forced to sell their labour on the market, because in the eyes of the market, that's the only way that they'll be useful. Remember, capitalism produces for exchange, and the only goal of capital is to infinitely expand. If we change the game though, and move towards socialism, abandon the cycle of capital and start producing for use value rather than exchange value, then it's a different situation. The very dilemma fizzles away altogether. We already, right now, produce 17% more food than required to feed the entire world. And judging by the fact that we've actually managed to have a huge housing surplus in the first world where those productive forces are actually going towards that, it's fair to say that shelter, when you actually have that industrialization, isn't hard to manage for people. But the problem is, because it's not profitable to give people food and shelter without them having to work for it, and even then, it doesn't get done. When we remove the profit incentive altogether, we can just go ahead and do it. We could do it literally right now, not even tomorrow, today. But, of course, that would collapse the economy. Now, at this point you may be wondering, if these people have their necessities provided to them already, who's going to actually do the labour on these production lines? Well, the answer is that no one would have to. We actually have the ability right now to automate all of these jobs in production lines and in sweatshops, which produce the majority of the world's goods right now. However, of course, if we did this today under our market system, the mass unemployment would just cause a complete crash of the market, because there'd no longer be anyone with salaries to buy back what was being produced. So companies are actually right now being prevented from implementing automation just because of the social system that we have today. There are no material constraints here. We are literally making ourselves work more than we need to because of a fucking social construct. Just let that sink in. Now, some of you who may be paying extra attention may have realized that I said earlier that socialism needs an industrialized country to establish itself, yet a lot of the countries that we're dealing with here in the third world just aren't as industrialized completely. The solution to this is quite simple: central planning. Instead of markets being used, these countries would have their resources allocated on whether they would be most useful in society, paving the way to genuine socialism. This is historically proven to provide the fastest industrialization in human history, that being in Russia, and presumably the next time around there wouldn't be literal Nazis next door threatening war in any moment, so the industrialization will be able to take place at a natural pace, rather than a forced one that could potentially lead to famines. At the very least, with outside support from first world countries, there wouldn't be any problems in the slightest. Are you delusional, you wannabe twink? If communism and the government owning everybody's toothbrushes was so great for industrialization, then why is it that North Korea has hardly any internet access for its citizens, yet South Korea is completely modernized, guided by the invisible hand of the free market? Alright, fair question. What about North Korea that didn't industrialize even though it has central planning? Well, ignoring the fact that they don't even have nearly the same natural resources that Russia had, they're blocked off from trading with quite literally every country in the world bar China, while South Korea was quite literally propped up by Western forces. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not defending North Korea in any way here. I think it's a shithole, and honestly there's argument for it to just kind of give up and succumb to liberalism as it stands now already. You know, it's not like it's going to be a beacon of global revolution at any point in the near future, but honestly that's just a completely different topic that we won't get into now. At the very least, all I'm doing is explaining why they are how they are today. If we had a global revolution, like we did around the start of the 20th century, but, you know, with this time more than one country succeeding into holding on to power, then situations like North Korea would just be an impossibility, honestly. The interesting thing about this argument that right-wingers are pushing, though, is that when we stay within the confines of capitalism, they're actually kind of right. There is no real alternative to the inhumane working conditions that these third worlders need to go through. That's why we have to look for alternatives. Liberals, that's why you need to be socialists. You know there's something wrong, you have the feels, but you don't have the reals in that an actual solution or alternative to the problem. Marxists do. And if you actually do care at all about these people in the slightest, then you will at least look into the possibility of alternatives to capitalism. Now, a lot of these people will not only acknowledge but use as part of their arguments that smartphones are expensive and couldn't be produced at the reasonable price that they are today without this cheap labor.
Because you know what? I'm not paying $600 for this. I'll pay $300. And if I stop buying this, who suffers? That Chinese kid who's right now making whatever, $3 a day or whatever, right?
Of course, though, they push this alongside the argument that it's this very cheap labour that will raise standards of living and industrialise the country. Now, unless they're just assuming that with the higher standards of living there will be no increase in wages at all, yet historically we see that with these high standards of living, people organise labour movements, which is why corporations move off-seas in the first place. It's clear that cheap labour cannot exist forever. So what happens when you can't exploit one place with cheap labour? You move to another place where you can, and then the same thing happens and you move to another. Now, I don't have a solid picture of the current geopolitical climate as it stands exactly right now, but if I had to guess, I'd say that we're seeing in China a move from an industry economy to a service-based economy because they've mainly done their industrialization over the last couple of decades. We're seeing that move now to India, where they're going to start doing the same thing, and then we'll probably move to Africa and they'll get a taste of the production line fun time. But here lies the fundamental problem with capitalism, is that it's an infinite growth with a finite world. The very source of what allows first world demands to be met will eventually run out, and we'll either see a complete economic crash as supply plummets, or we'll see brutal suppression of worker movements trying to get themselves higher wages and higher standards of living, like we actually already kind of see in South America today with literal Coca-Cola death squads. So capitalism does kill poverty, yes, but it's this very poverty on which it relies, and this isn't even taking into account that, as we've explained already, capitalism is what creates this poverty to begin with. The very nature of capitalism in this way is fundamentally contradictory. When you look at things from this perspective, you kind of realise how much of a whole fucking mess it all is. I mean, capitalism isn't really meant to exist as long as it has. It should have really fallen to organised labour a long time ago to establish socialism, yet due to various reasons like concessions or fascism, which is something Marx never really predicted, we still have capitalism today with the frequent economic crashes, with the imperialism and the war, with the brutal exploitation of the third world and the alienation in the first world. But now with the added bonus, we can see on the horizon of, due to capitalism's trend to infinite growth, the beginnings of the system starting to eat itself. The thing is, you're meant to cut off the head of the steak before it starts to eat its own tail. So, Professor, maybe when you start getting to the point where you can feel smug about being able to say human suffering is an inherent part of the system to improve lives over time, you should start looking at the shitty system you're pushing. Yeah, well... Oh, hold on. Oh, hey! My Patreon check just came in. Yeah, I'm out of here. See ya, fuckers. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and it provided some useful explanations for the topics we're dealing with. If you did enjoy this kind of video with the skits and whatever else, please let me know in the comments and hit that like button as well because I really appreciate it. If you really enjoyed the video, maybe you might want to check out my Patreon to support me there, but honestly, just watching is more than enough for me. Anyways guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.